Hello, and thank you for joining me. In this video, I will share an ongoing project, reissuing a modern classic, the Hebrew letter, Ismar David's 1990 writing manual. Ismar David was a prolific graphic designer, exhibition designer, type designer, calligrapher, illustrator, architectural designer, educator, and author. From the 1930s until the 1990s, he lived and worked in Berlin, Jerusalem, and New York. He was born in 1910 in Breslau, today's Poland. At age 15, he started an apprenticeship with a painter-varnisher, and 2 years later began classes at Breslau's Arts and Crafts School. He then studied decorative paintings at the Arts and Crafts School of Berlin-Charlottenburg. After his graduation, he worked as a sign painter. In 1931, David entered a design competition for the Jewish National Fund 5th volume of the Golden Book. The Jewish National Fund is a non-profit organization founded in 1901 to purchase land and encourage Jewish settlement in Ottoman and Mandatory Palestine. As Jews around the world began to donate funds towards this cause, they inscribed gifts for family, acquaintances, or distinguished people in an honorary book called the Golden Book. David won first prize for his design. Since production means were extremely limited in Jerusalem at that time, the Jewish National Fund asked for David's guidance on the book's execution. David traveled to Jerusalem to oversee the production process and stayed there for the following 2 decades. He established a studio for artistic advertising. The demand for his work was high, and he was commissioned for exhibition work, interior design, and graphic work. Many of his projects supported the establishment of the State of Israel, such as documents for the temporary Ministry of Finance, banknotes, various stamps, proposals for the state emblem, academic institutes, and the paramilitary organization, Haganah, which published a newspaper called Hamagen, and David was its graphic director. In this photograph, we see David on the right in his studio in Jerusalem. He is screen printing on an apparatus that he devised himself, since access to print shops was dangerous and not always possible. On the left is the illustrator and artist Yossi Stern. Stern did the illustration and David drew the Hebrew letterforms. We see they are surrounded by the posters they created together for the Haganah. Luckily, we were successful in locating all of them. David had many commercial clients as well. Many of the designs were bilingual and trilingual. Here is his work for Pikovsky Printers and Publishers, Universitas Booksellers, and the Jerusalem Automobile Company. It is during this time that he experienced the severe shortage in Hebrew typefaces, a shortage that was noticeable when a job required typesetting versus hand-drawn lettering. This was even more noticeable when there was a Latin version of the design that accompanied the Hebrew one. This problem led David to devise an innovative typographic solution, the first comprehensive Hebrew typeface family that comprised of a book style, a cursive style, and a monolinear style, each in 3 weights. In the late 40s and early 50s, David made several work trips to the US and met with the Intertype Corporation regarding the production of the David Hebrew matrices. In 1953, he immigrated to the US and began work in New York City. He embarked on a prolific design career that included graphic design, book design, type design, exhibition design, illustration, calligraphy, architectural design, and 3-dimensional design. And you can learn more about his work and his life on the website ismardavidarchive.org and in these 2 RIT Press publications. As we examine David's artistic and technical development over time and across a broad spectrum of mediums, we can see his original, skillfully executed letterforms. Many projects included biscriptural lettering, combining the Hebrew script and the Latin script, where the design decisions were crucial when it came to harmony and hierarchy. His fine education in Europe, combined with the practical challenges he experienced while working in Jerusalem, gave him a deep understanding of writing. His calligraphy teacher in Berlin was Johannes Boland. It was during his classes that David learned of the importance of understanding the culture and the tradition of letterforms. In a draft to a letter from the 1950s, David writes to his former professor, expressing his own teaching philosophy that emphasizes how crucial it is to study historical writing and perfect one's informed writing skills in order to be able to create new original designs. He writes, "We should absorb the development of writing styles and try to understand the cultural epochs that these styles reflect, but then we should try to express them in a new way that mirrors our own feeling and time and reverberates with the pulse of our own era. Writing should be a vivid form of art that is recreated each generation." David's involvement with historical writing styles deepened due to his teaching career. In the fall of 1954, he started as a lettering instructor at the Cooper Union. He said that he was forced to begin a more intensive study of letterforms in order to be one step ahead of his students. A year later, he also started teaching at the Pratt Institute. Cooper Union was similar to the arts and crafts school David attended in Germany. Professionals taught their respective crafts, giving students the education and experience they would need to succeed in their chosen fields. He enjoyed the exchange with the students and the opportunity to help them prepare for their professional lives. He found teaching particularly rewarding. We can examine more about David's approach to teaching from his notes and writings in his archive. For example, this statement: "The teaching of lettering should, I believe, develop the feeling of proportion, design, rhythm, and harmony. It should be a training for the eye to discover and distinguish the differences and fine nuances of graphic forms. With this, it should develop the manual discipline and skill required. The student should acquire the feeling of the link to the culture of the past and learn to integrate his own creative conception with tradition, which I believe is necessary for good contemporary design." David focused first on the history of writing and the cultural heritage of letterforms, then the skill and understanding that students should develop to only then be able to express themselves with contemporary letterforms. Around 1967, Cooper Union changed from a professional craft school into a college and dispensed with the services of its instructors. 2 years later, and for almost 2 decades to follow, David worked with the Geyer Studio. It was a New York City-based studio that provided commercial applications for calligraphy, scrolls, certificates, presentations, and advertising. David designed, consulted, and taught workshops for the employees. In 1979, David compiled his rich experience in Roman calligraphy into a publication titled Our Calligraphic Heritage. The book was issued in a limited edition of 2,500. What was innovative about this publication was its 3 components: the text, the charts, and the compositions, all packed in one box. The first unit is the writing book. It contained concise text accompanied by illustration and charts of historical, aesthetic, and technical aspects of calligraphy. The second unit is a set of 17 separate folders with reproduction of selected examples of major historic styles. And the third unit is a collection of 17 separate compositions correlating with the styles shown in the folders. Each composition demonstrates how classic styles can be used for contemporary graphic and calligraphic purposes. The user can start with the first style, classic Roman capitals. They will find text number 1, composition number 1, and folder number 1. In each folder, the historic reproduction is complemented by complete sets of alphabets rendered by David with additional explanatory text. Individual letters have been substantially enlarged for easier study. The 3 units are housed in a solid wood-framed box that was specially designed as an easel on which to display the folders while they are being used for study and practice. The next style is the rustic capitals with its 3 units. And this applied for the following styles. This book is a valued tool for combining academic learning with practical exercises. This nonlinear approach offers an in-depth understanding of paleography and calligraphy. The American calligrapher and author Paul Standard wrote a review of the book. It is a heritage of enormous scope, lying scattered in many hundreds of scholarly volumes available to specialists, but now taken in hand by a scholar-artist who is also an artist-scholar. Undaunted by the complexities of the task, Ismar David has discerned the threads of related families of letters and have presented them in a text supported by graphic illustration, enlightening the reader and inspiring the practitioner. Standard's description of the scholar-artist, who is also an artist-scholar, deeply resonates with me, showing this book as a tool for bridging the gap that still exists between the academic sphere and the practical sphere. David held lectures and workshops across the country for local calligraphic societies. In his own words, the theme of the workshop will be the evolution of Hebrew characters. Through scrutinizing the writings of different periods, we will recognize the characteristics of different styles. By understanding historic forms, we will try to come to terms with contemporary Hebrew writing. Participants will receive instructions on how best to overcome the problem of writing from right to left. They also will have the opportunity to practice and have their work reviewed. These events were well received, as we can see in the many thank you notes, reviews, and newsletters. In an interview for the New York Society of Scribes, David is quoted, "Historically, writing came first, but calligraphy elevated writing to an art form. It created beauty out of writing. This beauty is timeless. It continues to exist in manuscripts that have survived the vicissitudes of time to pose a challenge to us, which we are ill-equipped to accept. If formal Hebrew writing or calligraphy is to be understood, it must be considered as an integral part of Hebrew culture. Modern Hebrew type designs are only valid if they stay within the Hebrew tradition, which reaches back to pre-alphabetic times. The tradition is our inheritance. We have to make it our own and then build upon it, rejuvenate it, enrich it, and hand it down to generations that will follow." David has long been aware of the lack of an adequate manual for Hebrew calligraphy. His friends and students asked why had he not made a Hebrew equivalent to his Roman calligraphy manual. And so he devoted his time to a Hebrew book in between paying jobs and for much of the 1980s. The Hebrew letter Calligraphic Variations was published by Jason Aronson in 1990. It followed the model of his Roman calligraphy book from 1979, but in a more affordable way. The Hebrew letter provided a thorough examination of Hebrew writing styles and included David's idea for the further development of Hebrew letterforms by showing several experimental designs. It offered the analysis necessary for learners to become acquainted with the principles of Hebrew letterforms. The booklet included basic writing instructions as well as the historical background that will help the users, professionals as well as non-professionals, pursuing this ancient art to understand why we write Hebrew letters as we do. The heart of this work is the set of 32 charts, which contain complete alphabets in many style variations. The alphabets are accompanied by reproduction of historical material. In order to understand the essence of the Hebrew letter, the student needs two components. First, a sample of the writing of a given period. Second, a key to using the elements of that style. The rendered alphabets in these charts provide that key. David designed a functional box set that contained the elements of his core beliefs about calligraphy, historical examples for studying the letterforms, clear rendering of complete historic alphabets to better understand them visually, and composition illustrating the kind of personal application one can create based on this acquired knowledge. Here is the booklet with the text and historic reproduction of the writing styles. Each style has a correlating chart with a rendering of the complete alphabet. For example, number 1 and number 2 show different examples of early formal writing, written versus carved. As we move through time and geography to number 31 and number 32, we find modern rendering that includes ancient motifs in them. This gives us the tool to visually understand the organic transformation of Hebrew letters, followed by David's original contemporary design that demonstrates the great visual potential of this process. When I was attending Reading University for the type design program, I had about a decade worth of experience as a graphic designer, working mostly in the Hebrew and Latin scripts. There I first learned of the major gap in my own education and practice. As the semester progressed, I was working alongside my classmates and realized that they had a completely different starting point to designing letterforms, mostly because they were all familiar with the writing traditions of their own scripts. Calligraphy was usually a part of their graphic design and typography undergrad education. They had an understanding of letterforms that I did not have, not for the Latin script, and certainly not for the Hebrew script. And so when my friends were deep into designing their new typefaces in multiple scripts, I was in the library, learning about Hebrew writing and practicing with this book. In David's words, this was a challenge I was ill-equipped to accept. I couldn't help but wonder what could have happened had I had access to this book earlier in my career. And so I started sharing this resource with everyone I knew, making sure it was available in libraries. Today, fewer and fewer used copies are available for sale, and their price is gradually increasing. The idea for a second edition was born. There is a growing interest in Hebrew calligraphy as an art form, as well as a basis for Hebrew typeface design, lettering, and typography. New and emerging global communities of type design and calligraphy students and professionals are in search of rare educational tools of this kind. This is a great blog in Hebrew about the book. The title translates to The Secret Calligraphy of Itamar, or Ismar David. This book is an educational tool. It was never meant to be a secret. So how do we renew and expand access to this valuable resource? The first task is to provide a Hebrew translation. To my understanding, there are no comprehensive books for practicing Hebrew writing and calligraphy in the Hebrew language. Hebrew-speaking calligraphy instructors are using English books. The fact that this book is written in English excludes a growing and dynamic community of Hebrew-speaking artists, designers, students, educators, and enthusiasts, for whom reading and engaging in the English language might be a hurdle for absorbing knowledge. They cannot use the tool that would greatly benefit them for advancing their knowledge and better their practice. I'm currently working with Jonathan Howard to create the Hebrew version. We are tackling the challenges that any translation work entails, such as focusing on the clarity of the text while maintaining David's authentic voice, avoiding Latin loanwords, and writing inclusively, since Hebrew is a gendered language. I feel like the greater challenge with this translation is establishing a terminology. Considering the fact that Hebrew printing largely evolved in Europe It is not surprising that Hebrew type has developed mostly using Latin terminology to describe its anatomy. However, this terminology describes the specific structure of Latin characters and is inaccurate for describing Hebrew characters. For example, this component is commonly called a serif, but it is also referred to as an instroke, tag, sting, or thorn. While visually resembling the shape of a Latin serif, it is constructed in a completely different manner. It is originally a stroke of a blunt reed pen traveling inwards from left to right, creating a triangular shape at its beginning. When Hebrew was applied to stone carving, the characters did not undergo the mechanical adaptation to the material and tools as the Latin characters did. Contrary to the Latin, Hebrew did not include the deliberate and calculated work of expert stonecutters that led to the use of serifs, but rather kept their written form. This translation will require some decision-making to choose what term would be clear and best serve the readers. Another example is the terminology for Hebrew historic writing styles. Here are two instances that David uses the term semi-formal writing. I'm looking to find what drove David to choose this term. In this draft, we see several options written down by two people as the handwriting suggests. The numbered version are most probably by a translator, and the ones below are in David's handwriting. The numbered options use the Latin loanword for formal, formali, and below we see in Hebrew semi-formal, ktiva chatzi formalit. Underneath that, we see ktiva formalit beinoni, which translates to a medial style and might be a more accurate description than the semi. The second consideration for renewed and expanded access is affordability. In 1979, our Calligraphic Heritage sold for $67.50, which is about $300 in today's worth. David always hoped to make our Calligraphic Heritage more widely available in a less expensive paperback edition. In 1990, the Hebrew letter sold for $40, about $100 today. How do we keep this publication affordable so it will actually be accessible to users? Which leads us to the next point, which has to do with the practicality of the format. We are exploring affordable formats options for this specific type of nonlinear usage. Last but not least, a second edition holds an exciting opportunity to explore the story of how this unique book was created. The Ismar David papers are housed at the RIT Calligraphic Arts collection and include David's documents, writings, process work, and artwork. A research into these materials can result in new scholarship that explores David's teaching methodology. I'm very curious to learn more about the process of making this book. For example, what was left out? Is this an end paper design that was never executed? The next steps we plan to take in hope of realizing this project are: interview Hebrew-speaking calligraphers to learn of their preferred terminology and formats, boost awareness through exhibitions, lectures, and workshops, and finally, raise funds for production and distribution. Due to the almost non-existent market for publications in the Hebrew language, this educational project will have to rely on donations rather than investments. If you would like to learn more about this project and its progress, I would love to hear from you. Please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you.